You checked the account this morning, not because you needed to, because you always do. The number was fine. It's always fine now. That's the part nobody prepared you for, the fine. You make more than your parents ever did. You've done the things. The degree, the promotions, the contributions, the plan. And somewhere between the plan and right now, a question started forming. Not a loud question, a quiet one. The kind that surfaces at 2 a.m. when you can't explain why you feel trapped, despite having everything that was supposed to prevent exactly this feeling. Here's the thing nobody will say to you directly. The habits that built your income are not the habits that will build your freedom. And those two things, income and freedom, are not the same thing. They never were. But you were never told that, because the people selling you the next income milestone needed you to believe they were. That question forming right now, the one about why more money keeps producing more obligation instead of more peace, hold on to it. The answer exists, but it won't land until the very end of this. And if you leave before then, you'll keep doing the thing that's keeping you exactly where you are. There is a specific set of behaviors, not dramatic, not obvious, not things anyone would call mistakes, that function like a ceiling, invisible, structural, and the cruel part is they feel like responsibility. They feel like doing the right thing. They feel like what a financially serious adult is supposed to do. That's what makes them so effective at keeping you in place. 9 of them, and you're probably running most of them right now without knowing it. Let's start with what you believe, because the belief came first and everything else grew from it. You believe, at some level, maybe not consciously, but operationally, in how you actually make decisions, that earning more produces more freedom, that income is the variable, that if the number on your paycheck increases, the quality of your life expands with it. This belief feels like math. It feels neutral. It feels like something you didn't choose so much as simply observe to be true. And it is partially true, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous. More income does expand options. At first, in the early years, when the gap between what you earn and what survival costs is narrow, every raise genuinely opens something new. You can afford the better apartment, you can stop counting meals, you can breathe in a way you couldn't before. The belief gets confirmed. Income equals freedom, filed, stored, never questioned again. But something shifts, quietly, almost imperceptibly, somewhere around the point where you stopped being worried and started being comfortable. Your expenses didn't just rise with your income. They rose ahead of it, waiting for it, organized around the assumption that the income would keep coming. The apartment required it, the car assumed it. The school, the neighborhood, the version of yourself that you've been presenting to the world for the last several years, all of it was quietly constructed on the foundation of a number that belongs to someone else. Your employer. Who can change their mind? Re-engagement at minute 2. What if the raise was never the reward? What if it was the mechanism that made you easier to keep? Most people, when they hear that, feel a slight defensiveness. Good. That's the feeling of a belief being pressure tested. Stay with it. The middle class is not a failure state. That's important to understand before we go further. The people in it are not less intelligent, not less disciplined, not less worthy. Many of them are exceptional. Many of them are you. What the middle class actually is, structurally, mechanically, is a position where income and expenditure are close enough together that any disruption is catastrophic, but far enough apart that the catastrophe never quite arrives. You're not drowning. You're treading water in expensive clothes, and it looks from the outside like swimming. The 9 habits we're about to move through are not personality flaws. They are adaptive responses to a system that rewards the appearance of financial progress more than financial progress itself. You adopted them because they made sense at the time. Most of them still make sense on the surface. That's the problem. Imagine a clock. Not a clock on a wall, a clock inside a building. The kind built before electricity, where every floor had to generate its own heat. Ground floor is warm enough. You survive. 5th floor is comfortable. You stop noticing cold entirely. 10th floor is where people who have made it live. The view is real. The warmth is real. The status is real. But here is the thing about that building that nobody mentions when they're selling you on the climb. Every floor costs more to heat than the one below it. Not slightly more. Substantially more. And the higher you go, the more you need to burn just to stay warm. Not to get warmer. Just to stay where you are. The 10th floor requires 10 times the fuel of the first. And if the fuel stops, if the income stops, if the job disappears, if the industry shifts, you don't slowly cool down. You drop. Fast. Because you've forgotten how to live at a lower temperature. You've lost the tolerance for it. You've built a life that biologically, socially, psychologically cannot function at 40 degrees when it's used to 70. The middle class is not the 5th floor. The middle class is people on the 8th floor who believe they're almost at the top, burning everything they have to maintain the temperature, with no reserves, no insulation, and no real understanding of how much fuel they're going through. The wealthy, and I don't mean the rich, I mean the genuinely free, are not necessarily on a higher floor. Some of them are. But many of them are in a completely different building. A shorter one that costs almost nothing to heat. One where they could stop generating fuel for 2 years and never feel the cold. Their power is not the height. Their power is the tolerance. Their power is the ability to function at temperatures that would feel like failure to someone who's used to the 8th floor. The first habit that keeps you stuck is the one that built the floor you're standing on. You upgraded your life in proportion to your income, and you did it continuously, and you did it just slowly enough that you never felt the decision being made. This is called lifestyle inflation, but that phrase is too clinical to carry the weight of what it actually does. What it actually does is convert every raise you ever received into a fixed cost, not an opportunity, a cost. A permanent, monthly, non-negotiable commitment that now requires the income to sustain it. You didn't save the raise. You became the raise, and now you have to keep earning it just to stay level. The second habit follows directly from the first. You measure wealth by net worth instead of by runway. Net worth is a real number. It matters, but it's a static picture of a dynamic problem. What matters more, far more in terms of actual lived freedom, is how many months you could maintain your current life if your income stopped tomorrow. Not in theory, not with dramatic lifestyle cuts. As it actually is, most people with impressive net worth numbers have less than 3 months of runway, because the assets are illiquid or leveraged, or both. The house is equity you cannot spend. The retirement account has penalties and decades left on it. The investment portfolio has a psychological floor below which selling feels like defeat. Runway is different from net worth. Runway is sovereign. Runway is the thing that lets you say no. The third habit is the one that feels most like virtue. You optimized for income instead of margin. You took the higher paying job. You built the career that commanded more. You negotiated, and all of that is real, and none of it is wrong. But somewhere in that optimization, the question changed from how do I create distance between what I need and what I earn, to how do I earn more? And those are not the same question. One of them produces freedom. One of them produces a higher floor. Re-engagement at minute 8, loop 1 closes here. Earlier, the question was whether the raise was the mechanism that made you easier to keep. Here is the answer. It was. Not because anyone planned it that way. Because the math of it works that way automatically. The higher your floor, the more dependent you are on the thing generating the heat. That dependency is not financial. It's structural. It's baked into the life you've built. And the person who benefits most from that dependency is whoever controls your income. This is the psychological turning point, not a tactic, a shift in how you see the entire game. There is a specific feeling that financially free people carry that you can sense, but not quite name when you're around them. It's not arrogance. It's not indifference. It's a kind of stillness in situations where other people become reactive. They don't flinch at a bad meeting. They don't negotiate from tension. They don't perform enthusiasm for things that don't interest them. And for a long time, you might have assumed this was personality. confidence, self-assurance, something innate. It's not. It's arithmetic. When your life costs almost nothing relative to what you earn, the worst case scenario becomes an inconvenience. And when the worst case becomes an inconvenience, fear stops driving your decisions. You say the uncomfortable thing in the meeting not because you're brave, because you can afford to be wrong. You walk away from the client who disrespects you not because you're principled, because you don't need that invoice. You sleep through the night not because you're disciplined, because the background calculation that most people run every single night, the one that checks and rechecks whether the math still works, that calculation has a stable answer that doesn't require checking. The fourth habit is the one that masquerades most convincingly as financial intelligence. You use debt strategically. You leverage mortgages, car loans, financing options that allow you to preserve liquidity while building assets. And the logic is technically sound in isolation in a world where income is guaranteed. But debt does something to behavior that the math doesn't capture. Debt raises your floor. Every monthly obligation is a fixed cost that exists whether or not your income continues. And the accumulation of sensible, individually justified debts creates a structure that requires constant income to maintain. You are not leveraged. You are committed. There's a difference. Leverage implies optionality. Commitment implies obligation. The person with no debt and half your income may have more real options than you do. The fifth habit is spending to communicate. This one is almost invisible because it's social, and social spending feels like connection, not consumption. The neighborhood you chose communicates something. The car communicates, the restaurants, the vacations, the brands, not because you made a deliberate choice to signal, but because at some point spending became the language you use to tell people who you are. And once that happens, cutting the spending feels like losing the identity. So the spending continues. Not for the thing, for the signal. And the signal costs compound monthly, invisibly, permanently. The sixth habit is optimizing the expense instead of eliminating it. You found the better cable bundle. You switched insurance providers. You refinanced. And all of those moves are real, and they save real money, and they are entirely beside the point. Because you're managing the surface of a structure you never examined, the question is never which version of this expense is the most efficient. The question is whether the expense should exist at all. Most people never ask the second question, because the first one feels productive. It produces a number, a saving, a win, a confirmation that they're being responsible, and it leaves the structure intact. The seventh habit is keeping money in motion to avoid looking at it clearly. Automatic transfers to investment accounts, maximum contributions to retirement vehicles, money allocated before it's seen. This is taught as financial discipline. And some of it is, but it also functions as a way to never sit with the real question, which is, what is this money actually for? What future are you building? Is it a future where you work until 65 and then stop? Is it a future you actually want? Or is it the future that was outlined for you so automatically that you adopted it without examining it? Money in motion is money you don't have to think about, and not thinking is occasionally the exact problem. Re-engagement at minute 12, loop 2 territory, here is the number, not to teach with it. To confirm what you already feel, the median American household with a six-figure income saves somewhere between 6 and 9% of their earnings after expenses. The financially independent, not the richest, the freest, save between 30 and 50. The gap between those percentages is not income. It's floor height. It's the temperature they need to maintain. It's how much heat they're burning just to stay where they are. If you earn $95,000 a year and spend $88,000, you are saving $7,000 annually. That is not nothing. But at $7,000 a year, the accumulation of a year's worth of living expenses takes more than 12 years. 12 years before you have the kind of runway that changes the feel of a negotiation. Before you can walk into a difficult conversation at work and not feel the floor shifting beneath you. Before the bad option becomes survivable instead of catastrophic. Now take the same income. Spend 62,000, save 33. The math doesn't just get better, it changes category. A year's runway accumulates in roughly 2 years. In 10 years, you don't just have savings, you have silence. The kind of silence where the background hum of financial anxiety, the one you've had so long you've confused it with maturity, finally stops. The eighth habit is confusing the retirement account for a freedom account. These are different instruments. The retirement account is time-locked. It is a promise to your future self at the cost of access for your present self. This is worth doing. But it is not the same as having money you can use to change your situation now. The person who is maximum contributing to a 401 while carrying a car payment and a mortgage and 3 subscription services and a lifestyle that requires every single paycheck to sustain, that person is not building freedom. They are building a very well-funded prison with a release date of 65. Freedom requires liquid reserves, not all your money in vehicles you cannot access without penalty. The ninth habit is the one that ties all the others together. You postpone the renegotiation of what you actually need, of what your life actually requires, of what it costs per month to be you, genuinely, without the performance layer. Most people never have this conversation with themselves because it feels like settling, because the culture has built a very clean equivalence between reducing your expenses and admitting defeat. Downgrading is failure. Simplifying is giving up. And so the floor never moves, the heating requirement stays fixed, and the income has to keep coming, has to keep growing, has to keep outpacing the floor that keeps rising to meet it. Loop 2 closes here. Minute 14. Here is what changes when the floor drops. Not the net worth. The negotiation. You walk into a conversation with your employer differently when you have 18 months of runway than when you have 6 weeks. Not louder, quieter. The stillness is real because the math behind it is real. You're not performing confidence. You're not suppressing anxiety. There is simply less at stake. The worst outcome is a season of adjustment, not a catastrophe. And people feel that. Counterparties feel it across the table. The person who doesn't need the deal is always in a stronger position than the person who does, regardless of who has more on paper. Options multiply when the floor drops. Not because more opportunities appear, they were always there. Because you can finally see them without the distortion of fear. The project you didn't pursue because it felt risky. The conversation you didn't start because the timing wasn't guaranteed. The no you didn't say to the client who treated you badly because you needed the invoice. All of those moments were decided not by your judgment, but by your floor. By the fixed monthly requirement that narrows every decision down to one question. Can I afford to take that risk? Patience arrives without effort. This is the part that surprises people who get there. They expected patience to feel like discipline. It doesn't. It feels like indifference to urgency. When your survival doesn't depend on this quarter, this deal, this month, the timeline stops being a weapon someone can use against you. You can wait. And the ability to wait is one of the most underestimated forms of leverage in financial life. Silence becomes useful. The person who can sit quietly in a negotiation, who doesn't need to fill space, who can let an offer hang in the air without reflexively responding, that person is communicating power without performing it. Most people cannot do this. Not because they lack discipline, because they're running the calculation in real time, because the background noise of their financial situation is loud enough to make silence feel dangerous. Quiet the background, and the silence becomes a tool. Here is the warning, and it's specific because vague warnings are useless. The moment something starts shifting in how you see this, and something may have already started shifting, the almost universal next move is a dramatic gesture. People cancel everything. Announce a frugality challenge. Move the money around in a way that feels like change but is actually just rearrangement. Or worse, they wait for the perfect moment to start, when the bonus comes, when the debt is cleared, when things calm down. These are the same habits in new clothes. The dramatic gesture is still performance, still doing something visible, to feel like progress without changing the underlying structure. And waiting is simply the eighth habit in different language. The floor doesn't drop because you thought about dropping it. It drops because you stopped adding to it. One thing, not replaced. One payment, not renewed. One upgrade, not made. It compounds in reverse exactly as the accumulation compounded forward. Quietly, invisibly, month by month. The other error is treating this as a lifestyle philosophy instead of a structural one. This is not about minimalism, not about voluntary simplicity as an identity, not about the aesthetics of owning less. It's about the arithmetic of what you require, the number, the monthly number, what your life actually costs when the performance layer is removed. That number is the only number that determines how free you are, not the income, not the net worth, not the account balance. The gap between what you earn and what you genuinely need. That gap is your freedom. Everything else is decoration. Loop 3, the close. Not because you needed to. That reflex, the checking, the confirming, the quiet background calculation that runs without your permission, that's what financial pressure actually feels like when you've had it long enough to normalize it. It doesn't feel like fear anymore. It feels like what a serious adult does. It feels like you, but it isn't you. It's the floor. Wealth is not the number in the account. Wealth is the number of bad options you can survive without fear. Read that again in the silence after this sentence, because it recontextualizes everything that came before it in this video, and everything that happened before this video in your financial life. The person who can lose their job and feel inconvenienced is wealthier than the person who cannot lose their job and has 3 times the income. The person who could say no to the next opportunity and be fine is wealthier than the person who must say yes to every opportunity and is exhausted. The person who can wait is wealthier than the person who cannot, regardless of what either of them has in an account on a given Tuesday morning. This is not an invitation to earn less. This is an invitation to need less, strategically, specifically, structurally, to lower the floor with the same intentionality that you used to raise the ceiling. The 9 habits we moved through were never about money. They were about what money was supposed to provide and didn't. They were about the quiet, persistent, exhausting experience of doing everything right and still feeling the walls.